Hey guys, tonight is really a night where the fog outside seems thicker, the air colder, and the stars a little shy behind a drifting veil. Imagine standing on a mountain ridge, the mist swirling all around, when suddenly a giant looms before you. Taller than the tallest tree, broader than a castle wall, a ghostly titan stretches across the fog, mimicking your every move. Lift your arm, and the giant lifts its arm. Step forward, and it follows. Your heart pounds. You wonder, have you met a spirit of the mountain or something worse? I bet you won't survive more than 1 minute with your eyes open in that fog before your imagination starts running wild. Before we dive into tonight's ghostly tale. If this story brings you peace, please like and subscribe to our channel. Settle down, listen carefully, and together, let's enjoy this tender tale that will help you drift off into the most delightful, restful sleep. And hey, I know the day may have been heavy worries clinging to you like damp clothes. You can let them go for now. Just tell yourself I'll deal with them tomorrow. Tonight is about wandering through a softer, stranger place where shadows stretch tall but never threaten, and the fog is more comforting blanket than trap. Rest your head, slow your thoughts, and together we'll step into a soothing place where dreams begin to bloom. So here we are, at the beginning of the legend. The Brocken Mountain, standing tall in the Harz range of Germany, is not just a peak. It is a stage where weather and imagination conspire to perform strange dramas. For centuries, shepherds and travelers crossing its slopes whispered about the Brocken Specter, a giant ghostly figure that appeared at sunrise or sunset when the mist curled over the ridge. To a weary wanderer, it was terrifying enough to send them stumbling back down the trail, swearing that they had looked into the face of something not human. The earliest accounts don't give us tidy explanations. People back then weren't writing field reports. They were sharing shivers. Imagine a medieval pilgrim trudging up the winding paths, his cloak damp with dew, when suddenly there it was. A figure impossibly large, haloed with shimmering light, blocking his way. He might have thought it was St. Michael himself, or maybe a demon testing his faith. One quirky tidbit. Some travelers carried charms made of iron nails or wolf teeth, just in case they had to banish whatever mountain spirit they might meet. Not exactly standard hiking gear today, but in their minds absolutely necessary. Scientists are still debating exactly when the first written description of the Brocken Specter appeared. Some claim it surfaced in the 18th century, neatly pinned down in diaries and naturalist observations. Others argue that oral stories stretch much further back, perhaps into the Middle Ages, but simply weren't recorded. Either way, the mystery of shadow giants was already old. When Johann Wolfgang von Goethe climbed the Brocken and slipped it into his legendary play Faust. That's how iconic the spectre had become. It wasn't just a weather trick, but a cultural symbol. Picture it in your mind, the sun low, the fog thick, and you standing small against the rising peak. The mist turns golden, then silver. Then it shifts forms. You see yourself, but not yourself. A shadow tall as a cathedral stretched across a living canvas of fog. Around its head, a halo glimmers like a rainbow bent into a circle. This halo called a glorious cause by sunlight scattering through droplets of mist. But tell that to someone in the year 1500 when rainbows were as much divine promises as natural phenomena. There's a delicious irony here. The giant looks terrifying, but it's really only you. The mountain ghost is nothing more than your shadow magnified and projected. It's like nature's cruel joke. You fear the monster, but the monster is yourself. That's deep enough to land on a motivational poster, right next to Hang in There with the cat on a branch. But imagine the chill of the unknown. Before science peeled back the layers, the Brocken Specter was an omen. Some believed seeing it meant death within a year. Others thought it was a guardian watching over travelers. And in truth, when you're alone on a high ridge and something 10 times taller mirrors your every twitch, your rational mind doesn't exactly have the upper hand. Fear whispers louder than reason. The Harz Mountains gave fertile soil for such fears. Not only were the trails rugged and the fog relentless, but the Brocken itself had long been linked with witchcraft. People said witches met there on Walpurgis night, flying on broomsticks to cavort with the devil. The spectre appearing in the mist might well have seemed like one of those witches' guardians, or perhaps a demon, making sure no curious wanderer stumbled too close. If you were already primed to believe in dark forces, the sight of a towering ghost sealed the deal. What makes the Brocken Specter especially enchanting is how it connects imagination, weather, and culture. Think about it. One mountaintop, one repeatable optical trick, and you've got centuries of folklore feeding off of it. Even today, when tourists head up the Brocken hoping to glimpse their giant self, they're stepping into the same foggy shoes as the pilgrims, shepherds, and poets before them. And you can almost sympathize with those early witnesses. The thin mountain air, the damp mist, the echo of your own footsteps. It's easy to see how the mind fills the gaps with giants and ghosts. One quirky thing. Some hikers swore the spectre tried to chase them, though it was only their own hurried steps, making the shadow lurch forward. Nothing like scaring yourself silly with your own shadow. It's the ultimate boo moment from nature. So the Brocken Specter begins not as a scientific curiosity, but as a story told in whispers by firelight, as an image sketched in the trembling words of pilgrims. It's one of those reminders that humans have always lived in two worlds, the hard ground beneath their feet, and the vast fog of imagination above their heads. And on the Brocken, the line between the two is thin as mist. The Harz Mountains rise like a dark spine through central Germany, their ridges covered in thick forests of spruce and beech, their valleys cut by rushing streams that glint like silver in the sun. The air here is crisp, sometimes damp with mist, sometimes scented with pine resin, and always carrying the sense that something old and untamed lingers in the shadows. The Brocken, the highest peak in this range, towers above them all at just under 1,200 meters. To modern hikers, it may not sound especially high compared to the Alps or the Himalayas, but the Brocken is wrapped in mystery that far outweighs its size. Weather here has a mind of its own. Clouds sweep in, suddenly drowning the summit in fog so thick that a traveler can barely see the end of their walking stick. Cold winds lash across the rocks, and on some days, the temperature feels more suited to Scandinavia than Germany. It is this particular climate, the mingling of sunlight and sudden fog, that makes the Brocken a natural stage for the eerie illusion of the Brocken Specter. Without this mountain's peculiar conditions, the legend might never have been born. Long before trains and ski lifts made the Harz accessible, the mountains were feared as much as admired. Medieval peasants avoided the upper slopes, believing the peaks were home to spirits and witches. Stories grew like moss in the damp air. Local tales spoke of the Blocksberg, another name for Brocken, as the meeting place of witches on Walpurgis night, a festival that fell on April 30th. Even today, tourists gather there in costume to celebrate with bonfires, dancing, and theatrical reenactments of the witches' Sabbath. One quirky tidbit. During the Cold War, the Brocken was heavily restricted as it lay in East Germany, and locals joked that even the witches needed permission from the border guards to gather there. Scientists are still debating whether the Brocken's sinister reputation came first, or whether the spectre itself gave birth to the darker legends. Did people see looming shadows in the mist and assume witches were responsible? Or did the already spooky reputation of the mountain prepare people to interpret any strange sight as supernatural? It's a chicken or egg kind of mystery wrapped in fog and folklore. Geographically, the Harz Mountains were always a crossroads. Merchants and pilgrims traveled through them, bringing stories along the winding paths. Miners dug deep into their hillsides, extracting silver, copper, and iron, sometimes by candlelight in caverns that echoed like cathedrals. Those miners carried superstitions of their own, speaking of Berggeister or mountain spirits who guarded the ore and punished greed. Imagine a miner climbing out of the shaft after a long shift, squinting at the sudden sunlight, only to see a towering figure stretch across the fog. No wonder they believed the spirits were keeping an eye on them. The Brocken itself has a kind of stage presence. From far away, it looks rounded and solemn, like a giant watching the valleys below. Up close, the terrain is rocky, scarred with boulders, and dotted with stunted trees shaped by fierce winds. Snow often lingers longer here than anywhere else in the Harz, making it feel eternal, as if the mountain exists on its own clock. Visitors sometimes describe standing at the summit as being on the roof of Germany, where the world below seems small and far away. Poets of the Romantic period loved the Harz. Heinrich Heine, one of Germany's great writers, wandered these forests and described them with both awe and unease. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe famously climbed the Brocken in 1777, later weaving the mountain into Faust, where witches fly to the peak for their revels. In these literary works, the Harz Mountains became more than just geography. They became a canvas for exploring fear, temptation, and the sublime. And of course, nothing says sublime like a ghostly colossus shimmering in the mist. Modern visitors sometimes smile at the superstition, but even now, when the fog rolls in and the summit disappears into whiteness, you can feel the weight of centuries pressing in. There is silence except for the crunch of boots on gravel and the wind moaning through the trees. Your mind starts to imagine shapes in the mist, and suddenly, when the sun breaks through at just the right angle, you see it, the giant again, vast and unnerving, standing where no one should. Here's a quirky modern fact the Harz region has capitalized on its eerie reputation. There are themed hotels, ghost tours, and even special Specter hikes advertised to visitors. Tour guides cheerfully explain the science behind the illusion, but they also lean into the fun of the folklore. After all, it's one thing to hear a physics lecture about light diffraction, and another to gasp when your own foggy doppelganger raises its massive hand in salute. But let's not dismiss the Harz too quickly as a mere backdrop for ghost stories. This region shaped Germany's history in many ways. The mines provided wealth to medieval princes, the forests supplied timber, and the rivers powered early industry. Even the weather played a role, influencing where settlements thrived and where they struggled. The Brocken, standing in the middle of it, all became a kind of natural monument, equal parts resource, obstacle, and mystery. So when we speak of the Brocken Specter, we're not just talking about a neat optical trick. We're talking about a phenomenon rooted in a specific place, a mountain, where weather history and imagination collide. The Harz Mountains gave the Specter its home, its legends, and its power. Without them, perhaps the story of the ghostly giant would have faded into obscurity. Instead, it endures, clinging to the mist like lichen to stone. And in that endurance, the Harz Mountains remain what they've always been, a place where the line between the real and the imagined grows foggy, where shadows can become giants, and where a simple walk on a cloudy morning might just turn into an encounter with the unknown. Pilgrims and wanderers once crept along the crooked paths of the hearts with heavy cloaks, pulled tight, and prayers whispered under their breath. The mountains were not only physically demanding, but spiritually unsettling, and travellers crossing their ridges often carried not just food and water, but relics, charms, or handwritten blessings from priests. The Brocken was the crown of these peaks, and the stories told about it seemed designed to make knees tremble and hearts race before one even set foot on its slopes. It was here on misty mornings that solitary wanderers swore they saw figures so vast that the trees looked like twigs beside them. Imagine a poor pilgrim on his way to a shrine, staff in hand, already weary from weeks of walking, suddenly halting mid-step as a gigantic shadow rose out of the fog. To him, this wasn't just an oddity. It was a test. Was the figure an angel of judgment or a demon trying to lure him from the path? The answer depended on the story he had last heard whispered by a village fire. One mainstream historical fact is that pilgrimage routes through Germany were well established by the 11th and 12th centuries, with countless travellers making their way to sites such as Aachen, or even onward toward Rome and Santiago de Compostela. These long journeys carried people across landscapes where nature often seemed charged with divine or demonic significance. A storm wasn't simply a storm, it was a message. And so, when the fog on Brocken formed into towering figures, it was never just weather. It was an omen, a divine sign, a warning, or a blessing. But not every account was solemn. One quirky tidbit from a 16th century traveller's note describes how a merchant, upon seeing the shadow giant, threw his hat at it in an attempt to chase it away, only to realize the figure had dutifully thrown its hat as well. He apparently laughed, though, only after recovering from his initial fright. It's comforting to think that even in centuries past, people occasionally saw the humor in their own superstition. Still, many stories leaned into the darker side. Shepherds guarding flocks at high altitude told of grey men walking the mist, their eyes like glowing coals. Others whispered that anyone who dared follow the shadow giant into the fog would never return. These tales gave the Brocken a sinister reputation, discouraging casual wanderers from venturing too close to the summit. It wasn't just the difficulty of the climb that kept people away. It was the sense that something watched from within the clouds. Scientists are still debating how much of these stories were genuine reports of the Brocken Specter versus embellishments spread by word of mouth. Did everyone really see towering figures? Or did tales of the giant become so widespread that wanderers began convincing themselves they saw what others had described? Folklore tends to snowball this way. A shepherd sees something odd. A merchant retells it at an inn. A monk writes it down with theological flourish. And suddenly, the mountain is haunted by a legend larger than life. What makes this all the more interesting is how personal these encounters were. Unlike a storm that everyone in a valley could see, the spectre appeared differently, depending on where a traveller stood, how the fog drifted, and how the sun broke through. To one hiker, it was a colossal figure with wings of light. To another, just a vague shadow crowned with rainbow rings. Each version was intimate, as though the mountain had chosen to whisper its secrets differently to each visitor. It's worth remembering, too, that medieval Europe was a place where the boundaries between faith, fear, and folklore blurred constantly. The church preached about angels and demons as everyday realities. Local healers spoke of spirits in trees and rivers. Farmers saw eclipses and comets as portents. So when a weary pilgrim saw his own body magnified into a ghostly giant striding across the fog, he did not separate science from belief. He simply accepted the vision as part of a world where the natural and supernatural lived side by side. And maybe in a way that makes sense. standing on a mountain with mist curling around you, the silence pressing in your breath, visible in the cold air. How could you not feel that you'd stepped into a place where the ordinary rules no longer applied? One can almost picture the fireside scene later that night. The traveller wrapped in wool, sitting in a smoky inn with his boots drying by the hearth, tells of the giant he saw. His listeners lean closer, wide-eyed, clutching mugs of ale while the wind howls outside. The story grows taller with every retelling, until by the time it reaches the next village, the shadow has eyes of flame and speaks in thunder. That's folklore at work, half memory, half invention, all wrapped in the fog of belief. The Brocken Specter then was never simply an illusion. For these pilgrims and wanderers, it was part of a spiritual journey, a challenge, a terror, and sometimes, oddly enough, a joke at their own expense. And whether they bowed in reverence, fled in panic, or laughed nervously, one thing was certain: no one forgot the day they walked into the fog and met the ghostly giant of the mountain. The Brocken didn't gain its reputation as just another misty mountain. It earned the title Witch's Peak. For centuries, villagers in the valleys below whispered that on Walpurgis night, the very summit came alive with shrieking laughter, wild dances, and the flapping of cloaks or wings in the fog. Walpurgis, held on the last night of April, was thought to be the evening when witches flew to the mountain to celebrate their Sabbath, a wild revel where they consorted with spirits and the devil himself. The fact that this particular night happens right as spring bursts forth, when bonfires and festivals already filled the countryside, only made the tales more powerful. The Brocken's lonely height and swirling fog created the perfect stage for such imaginations. Travellers reported seeing lights flickering on the slopes, probably torches or campfires, but through mist they became infernal glows. Strange echoes carried up the valleys. A single goat bell could sound like a distant chant, and then, of course, the Brocken Specter would appear. A towering shadow figure looming in the fog seemed to confirm everything people believed about the witches' gathering. One mainstream historical fact is that Walpurgis Night was indeed a deeply rooted folk festival across Central and Northern Europe. It mixed Christian saints' days with much older pagan rites of spring, often involving bonfires meant to ward off evil spirits. On the Brocken, however, the celebration took a darker twist. Local clergy condemned the mountain as a haunt of witches, and later writers seized upon the imagery, spreading its sinister fame even further. Here's a quirky tidbit. In the 17th century, some villagers believed the witches reached the Brocken by smearing broomsticks with a magical salve made from herbs and animal fat, then flying through the night sky. Modern historians, with a wink, suggest these witch flights may have been visions induced by hallucinogenic plants, basically the medieval version of a bad trip. Imagine explaining that to a terrified farmer who swore he saw women soaring over the treetops. Scientists are still debating whether the Brocken's reputation as the Witch's Peak was based on actual clandestine gatherings of outsiders, or whether it was entirely a product of fear and imagination. Some folklorists argue that wandering heretics or secret pagan groups may have met in remote places like this, fueling rumors. Others insist the mountain's eerie conditions alone birthed the legend. The truth likely lies somewhere in the fog between. What we know for certain is that the Brocken became cemented in Europe's cultural imagination. Goethe's Faust features Walpurgis Night on the Brocken as a vivid scene of chaos, seduction, and infernal temptation. Poets and painters returned again and again to the image of the lonely peak, where mortals might brush shoulders with the supernatural. And naturally, the spectre itself, the ghostly giant, fit perfectly into these tales. What better figure to guard a witch's Sabbath than a looming shadow as tall as a cathedral glowing faintly with a halo of rainbow light? Picture the scene through the eyes of a villager in the 1600s. It's April 30th, and the night is alive with distant fires on the mountaintop. Smoke rises into the clouds, and strange shadows dance against the mist. A farmer grips his rosary tighter, telling himself it's only travelers' only bonfires, but then he hears what sounds like laughter carried on the wind. Worse, when dawn breaks and he dares to glance toward the mountain, a giant figure looms in the fog. To him, the evidence is undeniable. The witches were there, and they had summoned something far larger than themselves. Even today, the Brocken leans into this reputation. Each spring, the Walpurgis festival draws crowds dressed as witches' devils and other spectral beings celebrating with music, parades, and theatre. It's more carnival than curse now, but the echoes of fear still linger in the way people speak of the mountain. And standing on the summit, when the mist wraps around you, it's not hard to understand why. The trees creak in the wind, the ground feels soft and ancient underfoot, and the fog shifts in sudden, almost living movements. You half expect to see a circle of hooded figures through the haze, or worse, the vast silhouette of the Brocken Specter itself, watching from just beyond reach. That's the peculiar magic of the Witch's Peak. Whether you believe in witches or not, the atmosphere of the place makes the idea hard to shake. The Brocken Specter didn't appear in a vacuum, it appeared on a mountain, already thick with stories of witches' laughter, pagan fires, and devilish bargains. When shadow giants walked across the fog, there people didn't just see a trick of light. They saw confirmation of their deepest fears and darkest tales. By the time Europe slipped into the Age of Enlightenment, the world was supposed to be growing less superstitious. Scholars were mapping the stars, philosophers were debating reason and logic, and scientists were poking around with experiments in everything from electricity to optics. Yet even in this new age of reason, the Brocken Specter still stood tall literally and figuratively in the misty imagination of the continent. Travelers continued to report seeing the giant forms on the mountain, and now instead of whispering about witches or demons, some of them tried to put pen to paper in a more rational way. This was the era of curious gentlemen with telescopes tucked under their arms, carrying notebooks instead of swords. They climbed mountains not to flee demons, but to sketch rocks and record weather patterns. The Brocken drew such minds like moths to a lantern. After all, if people for centuries had sworn that giants walked its fog, surely something was worth investigating. One mainstream historical fact is that the Enlightenment period, particularly the 18th century, saw a surge of interest in natural philosophy, what we now simply call science. Explorers and thinkers like Edmund Halley, who studied comets, or Robert Boyle, who experimented with air pressure, embodied this spirit of curiosity. The Brocken Specter, baffling yet repeatable, was exactly the kind of puzzle they loved to solve. Accounts began shifting tone. Instead of fearful pilgrims, we hear of gentlemen scholars writing about an optical effect of the atmosphere. Some conducted experiments deliberately standing at the summit during foggy mornings to see if they could summon the ghostly giant at will. They noted how the position of the sun seemed crucial, how one had to stand with the light behind them, how the mist needed to be thick, but not impenetrable. Bit by bit, the fear of the spectre gave way to fascination. But not all explanations were neat. One quirky tidbit, some early thinkers actually theorized that the Brocken was haunted by the shadows of other travelers far away on the mountain, their forms stretched and magnified by unknown forces. So instead of a giant version of yourself, they imagined you might be seeing the silhouette of some unlucky hiker 2 ridges over. which honestly sounds just as creepy. Don't worry, it's not a demon, it's just Steve but 200 feet tall. Comforting, right? Scientists are still debating how much credit the Enlightenment thinkers deserve for explaining away the spectre. Some argue that the phenomenon was already half understood by shepherds and locals, who may not have used technical terms, but certainly realized the giant only appeared when the sun was behind them. Others insist it took the systematic curiosity of the Enlightenment to pin it down as an optical illusion. The truth may be that both threads folk wisdom and scientific study were weaving the same foggy cloth. What's fascinating here is the mood shift. Instead of shrieking in terror, people began climbing the Brocken, hoping to see the spectre, almost like a scientific safari. Imagine scholars huddled in cloaks at dawn, their breath puffing white in the air, clutching quills and sketchbooks, waiting for the giant to appear. And when it did, instead of running, they scribbled furiously, noting halo effects, angles of light, and how movement matched their own. The Brocken had become not only a place of fear, but also a natural laboratory. The broader Enlightenment also loved anything that blurred the line between awe and knowledge. That was the age of the sublime experiences that overwhelmed the senses with beauty and terror all at once. A giant ghost in the clouds perfect. It thrilled the soul while inviting rational inquiry. Poets and scientists were, for once, on the same foggy page. And there's something almost comedic about the contrast. Medieval wanderers praying desperately into the mist versus Enlightenment philosophers standing in the exact same spot, muttering, yes. Very interesting diffraction. Imagine a time travel meeting of the two, one clutching across the other, holding a notebook, both gawking at the same enormous shadow. The mountain must have had a quiet chuckle at their expense. So in this period, the Brocken Specter transformed in the public mind. It didn't lose its eeriness, it never has, but it shifted from omen to curiosity, from curse to spectacle. The giants of the mist were still there, still lifting their hands when you lifted yours, but now they were studied, sketched, debated. And instead of just frightening peasants, they began inspiring scientists, thinkers, and eventually entire generations of poets who would carry the legend into literature. The fog didn't change, the mountain didn't change, but the eyes that looked into the mist began to see, with a new kind of curiosity, one that mixed fear with wonder, and wonder with a desire to understand. The Brocken Specter had stepped onto a bigger stage, no longer only a phantom in the night, but a mystery in the age of reason. The Enlightenment may have given the Brocken Specter its first rational framework, but the story hardly ended there. If anything, the ghost of the mountains became even more fascinating. Once poets, painters, and dreamers of the Romantic Age laid eyes, or rather, imaginations upon it. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Europe was swept up in Romanticism, a cultural movement that celebrated mystery, emotion, and the sublime. Nature was no longer just a puzzle to be solved. It was a cathedral of wonder, a mirror of the human soul. And what better altar for the sublime than a fog-draped mountaintop, where giants appeared at sunrise. Writers and poets flocked to the Harz Mountains. Among them, the great Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who made an ascent of the Brocken in 1777. His later masterpiece, Faust, features the famous Walpurgis night scene set on the Brocken itself. In it, witches whirl through the air, devils dance, and supernatural forces collide. Though Goethe was more interested in myth and philosophy than optics, it's hard not to imagine that the ghostly shadows of the Brocken Specter influenced his vision. After all, what could feel more like a brush with the otherworldly than watching your own form stretch across the clouds like some phantom king? In this romantic context, the spectre gained a dual personality. On one hand, scientists continued to examine it, measuring angles, studying halos, and building on optics theories from Newton and Huygens. On the other hand, artists embraced its mystery. For them, the explanation didn't diminish the magic. It only deepened it. The very fact that such a marvel could arise from natural light and mist seemed proof that the world itself was enchanted, if only one had eyes to see. Paintings of the period show lone wanderers on craggy peaks, gazing into stormy skies. Caspar David Friedrich, the German Romantic painter, captured this mood perfectly. Though he never painted the Brocken Specter directly, many of his canvases echo the same theme: the smallness of man before the vast and strange powers of nature. The idea of a solitary figure staring into fog, overwhelmed by awe that was practically the Brocken Specter distilled into brushstrokes. And it wasn't just art. Travelers wrote about their ascents as if they were pilgrimages. Some accounts describe the moment of seeing the spectre as life-changing, like a glimpse of eternity painted in light and shadow. Others spoke of it in trembling tones, as if the mountain had briefly allowed them to meet a spirit twin, a ghost self, hovering between heaven and earth. One curious development was the way the spectre became wrapped up in the broader mythology of Walpurgis Night, the traditional spring festival on April 30th. The Brocken was already associated with witches' gatherings in folklore, and now the giant apparitions in the mist seemed like confirmation. Poets played with the idea perhaps those figures weren't just shadows, but the shades of ancient sorcerers dancing eternally in the fog. The line between optical illusion and supernatural omen blurred beautifully in romantic hands. Meanwhile, scientists of the era were not deterred by all this mysticism. They pressed on with their explanations. The phenomenon was increasingly linked to diffraction and scattering of light phenomena that were being studied in more detail, thanks to experiments with prisms and lenses. Rainbows, halos, coronas. All of these effects became part of the same scientific family. The Brocken Specter was just one particularly dramatic member of that atmospheric kin. But perhaps the most important cultural shift was how the spectre came to symbolize the human encounter with the unknown. For medieval pilgrims, it was a demon. For Enlightenment scholars, it was an optical trick. For romantics, it became a metaphor, a reminder that life is filled with shadows larger than ourselves, cast by forces both natural and spiritual. The legend of the Brocken Specter spread far beyond Germany. British travellers carried stories of it home, and soon mountaineers in the Scottish Highlands and the Alps reported seeing similar apparitions. The term Brocken Specter itself was adopted into English, cementing the German mountain's role as the emblem of the phenomenon, no matter where it appeared. And so, in the age of Romanticism, the spectre was no longer just a quirk of weather. It was a cultural icon painted in words and colours, infused with both science and soul. The giant in the mist had become a mirror of humanity itself, fragile, luminous, fleeting, and yet impossibly grand. The mountain stood as it always had, cloaked in its grey veil, waiting for just the right mix of sun and fog. But now, when travellers made the climb, they did not only hope to see a shadow, they hoped to glimpse the sublime, to find for a few trembling moments that their own small existence could stretch into something vast and unearthly, if only in mist. By the 19th century, the Brocken Specter was no longer a curiosity, known only to a handful of mountaineers or poets. It had become something of a celebrity in the growing world of travel writing and early tourism. With the rise of railroads and the increasing appetite for alpine adventure, more people than ever before sought the high places of Europe, and with them the promise of the ghostly giant. Imagine a Victorian traveller clutching a leather-bound journal, boots, laced tight, and a sense of scientific enthusiasm mixed with romantic longing. They climb the Brocken at dawn, breath frosting in the chilly air, fog curling around the crags. When the sun rises there, it is their own elongated form projected against the clouds, haloed by a rainbow crown. A perfect moment ripe for scribbling down and publishing in a travel magazine back in London or Paris. These accounts often blurred the line between science and spectacle. Some writers emphasize the optical trick, describing the angle of the sun, the thickness of the fog, and the neat mathematics of shadow projection. Others preferred to linger on the emotional experience, how it felt like encountering a celestial double, a spirit twin made of light. And honestly, who could blame them? Even today, if you saw your own shape stretched like a titan across the mist, wouldn't you lean a little toward poetry over physics? In fact, the Brocken itself became something of a tourist destination, precisely because of these stories. Guidebooks began to mention the Specter, and mountain inns offered travelers a cozy place to recover after their foggy visions. By the mid-1800s, postcards and woodcut illustrations depicted the eerie sight, complete with astonished gentlemen in top hats or ladies in heavy skirts pointing dramatically at the giant shadows. One quirky tidbit that surfaced in this period was the claim that people who saw the Specter would enjoy good luck, so long as they didn't try to chase it. Apparently, running after your own ghost was a surefire way to tumble down the mountainside, which, let's be real, sounds less like a mystical curse and more like common sense disguised as superstition. Still, these rules of the Specter gave travelers something to joke about over dinner once they were safely back at the inn. The era also gave rise to a fascinating debate. Was the Brocken Specter truly unique to its namesake mountain, or could it appear anywhere conditions allowed? Scientists argued vigorously over this point. Some insisted the Brocken's geography and frequent fog made it special, while others countered with reports from the Scottish Highlands, the Alps, and even volcanic peaks as far away as Tenerife. The consensus today is that the phenomenon can happen anywhere, but back then, the debate itself added to the mystery. After all, a mountain with its own exclusive ghost had a much more dramatic ring than a mere weather report. At the same time, the cultural fascination with ghosts, spirits, and doubles fed into the Specter's popularity. The 19th century was a golden age of seances, table-turning, and spiritualist societies. Newspapers reported on mediums who claimed to channel the dead, and readers devoured Gothic novels filled with restless phantoms. Against this backdrop, the Brocken Specter was like a natural world seance, your very own shadow becoming a supernatural encounter. No wonder it thrilled audiences. And because travel writing was booming, the phenomenon crossed oceans. Reports of spectral giants appeared in American newspapers, thrilling readers who might never set foot on the Harz Mountains. Some writers even speculated that the indigenous legends of shadowy mountain spirits around the world were connected to this optical trick, though as scientists are still debating cultural myths, often arise independently, shaped more by human imagination than by shared phenomena. By the late 1800s, photographers entered the scene. With bulky cameras strapped to their backs, they attempted to capture the elusive giant in the mist. Early results were often disappointing. The long exposures blurred the outlines, and the fog itself was tricky to frame. But even the failed attempts added to the mystique. If the camera couldn't catch it, maybe the Brocken Specter was truly meant only for the naked eye. Still, word of the phenomenon spread. Scientific societies included it in their proceedings, and natural philosophers gave public lectures complete with lantern slide illustrations. At the same time, novels and poems continued to weave the spectre into their imagery. One British poet referred to it as the Shadow King upon the clouds, while a German storyteller described it as a mirror of man's grandeur and frailty, towering yet made of vapour. Talk about a humble brag for humanity. So by the end of the 19th century, the Brocken Specter had secured its place in both scientific literature and popular imagination. It was no longer just an eerie surprise for the occasional hiker. It was a recognized part of Europe's cultural landscape. A ghost you could plan a trip to see. A shadow that carried both rational explanation and romantic weight. And while skeptics rolled their eyes, insisting it was just an illusion, the very fact that it was an illusion created by nature kept people coming back. After all, wasn't the whole of travel, especially in the Victorian age, about chasing illusions, whether of grandeur, adventure, or escape? As the 20th century dawns, the Brocken Specter steps gracefully, or perhaps spookily, into the age of modern mountaineering. By now, climbing had shifted from a pursuit of poets and curious gentlemen in wool coats to a proper sport. Ropes, ice axes, pythons, and later crampons became part of the culture. And wherever climbers went up the jagged Alps, the Scottish Highlands, the Andes, even the Himalayas, the Spectre was waiting in the mist, ready to surprise them. Climbers, unlike tourists of the 19th century, had little patience for folklore. They were focused on surviving rock faces, avalanches, and frostbite. Yet even these hardened mountaineers dangling from ropes or standing atop knife-edge ridges would pause in wonder when they saw their own gigantic forms ringed in rainbow light. Many climbing journals of the early 1900s include casual notes like "encountered a fine Brocken Specter" at sunrise, tucked between grim descriptions of near-death falls and miserable bivouacs. For them, the ghostly giant was both a reward and a reminder nature wasn't just deadly, it was beautiful too. One famous account comes from the Alps in 1925, where a group of climbers swore they saw not only themselves magnified, but also what looked like an extra figure, someone who wasn't actually there. This story, published in a mountaineering bulletin, fueled debates about whether the spectre could play tricks on perception, creating phantom companions in the fog. Scientists explained it as overlapping shadows, but climbers whispered of guardian spirits. And honestly, when you're 3,000 meters above sea level with a thin rope as your lifeline, the idea of a ghostly helper doesn't sound so bad. Meanwhile, aviation was taking off literally. Early pilots flying fragile machines through clouds began to report seeing Brocken Specters too. Imagine being in an open cockpit scarf, flapping goggles fogged, and suddenly spotting a vast shadow of your biplane projected onto the mist, halo and all. Some pilots nicknamed it the Angel of the Clouds. In World War I, nervous aviators described the phenomenon as a reassuring presence, a phantom wingman. Scientists, of course, pointed out that it was simply sunlight, fog, and perspective. But try telling that to a 19-year-old pilot flying into combat. By mid-century, the spectre was popping up in mountaineering literature, meteorological studies, and even popular magazines. National Geographic ran illustrations explaining it in layman's terms, while textbooks began to include it in chapters on atmospheric optics. The idea of a glory, the rainbow halo surrounding the shadow, was more rigorously studied, with the rise of physics labs experimenting with light scattering. Tiny droplets wave interference diffraction. This was the language scientists used, and yet the public still preferred the idea of a ghost on the mountain. A quirky tidbit from this period: some climbers started to call the spectre the mountain selfie. Long before smartphones, they joked about capturing themselves larger than life, no filter required. Sure, the joke doesn't quite land without Instagram, but you can see the appeal. A fleeting moment, where nature itself frames you as a giant hero. Still, the phenomenon carried its darker associations. In mountaineering folklore, there grew a belief that seeing the Brocken Specter before a dangerous climb was an omen sometimes of survival, sometimes of doom. The ambiguity kept the superstition alive. Scientists are still debating whether such folklore influenced climbers' psychology. Did believing in omens actually affect decision-making on expeditions? After all, if you thought a ghostly twin had blessed you, maybe you took risks you shouldn't. And yet the allure persisted. By the 1960s, photography had finally caught up. Lightweight cameras allowed climbers to capture the specter in clearer detail. Grainy black and white photos showed the giant shadows and their rainbow crowns. And for the first time, people back home could see the phenomenon without climbing a foggy peak themselves. The specter was no longer just a story, it was evidence pinned to glossy paper. But here's the thing, even with photos, the magic didn't vanish. Climbers often reported that the pictures never quite did justice to the experience. The scale felt smaller, the colors less vivid, the sense of awe missing. Just like fireworks on television, the Brocken Specter seemed to resist being bottled up. You had to be there standing in the cold mist to really feel it. By the late 20th century, the Brocken Specter had become part of mountaineering culture worldwide. Himalayan climbers spoke of it in hushed tones, describing specters appearing above glaciers at sunrise. Scottish climbers joked about seeing their inner giant on foggy ridges. Even casual hikers began to hear about it, thanks to outdoor magazines and guidebooks. What once terrified medieval pilgrims now delighted weekend adventurers. And yet, despite all the science, the shadow remained slippery. Was it simply an illusion or something more? Could psychology and atmosphere combine to create experiences beyond pure physics? Climbers, pilots, and scientists each had their answers, but the ghost on the mountain kept its secrets stretching tall and silent in the mist. By the late 20th century, the Brocken Specter had secured its role as both a scientific curiosity and a pop culture oddity. But this era also introduced a new stage for our towering phantom, the silver screen glossy magazines, and the buzzing chatter of paranormal enthusiasts who saw in the specter more than just optics. Film crews who braved mountain locations discovered that foggy mornings could sometimes produce the eerie giant. Cinematographers described struggling to capture the scale. The camera always flattened the drama, but when they did succeed, the result looked like a special effect conjured without wires or green screens. One German documentary from the 1970s even featured the specter as a climax shot, presenting it as nature's own projectionist. Not bad for a shadow with zero acting lessons. Meanwhile, outdoor magazines of the era leaned into the mystery. Glossy spreads showed climbers on peaks with rainbow halos around their heads, dubbing them haloed heroes of the highlands. Some articles went so far as to suggest that the specter represented humanity's eternal battle with nature's fragile bodies versus infinite sky. Our shadows enlarged to mythic proportions by nothing more than droplets of mist. High drama, low humidity. At the same time, paranormal circles picked up the phenomenon and gave it a decidedly spooky spin. UFO enthusiasts pointed to photographs of plane shadows ringed by glories, claiming they were evidence of aerial entities. Ghost hunters folded the Brocken Specter into their catalogue of apparitions, arguing that mountain spirits were using the fog to reveal themselves. Scientists rolled their eyes, but these fringe theories only added to the specter's cultural longevity. After all, nothing sells quite like the suggestion that your morning hike might end in a brush with the supernatural. A quirky tidbit surfaced in Britain during the 1980s. A small hiking club called themselves the Spectre Seekers. Their entire mission was to climb foggy peaks in hopes of spotting their personal giants. They kept meticulous logs noting weather conditions, sun angles, and how long the apparition lasted. Their records, later shared with meteorologists, actually contributed useful data to studies of atmospheric optics. Imagine that a ghost hunting club that accidentally did science. Of course, debates persisted. Was the Brocken Specter nothing but a straightforward projection? Or could there be subtler aspects we hadn't fully grasped? Some physicists insisted that the colors of the glory surrounding the shadow were not yet fully explained, especially the delicate blues and purples. Others argued that perception itself played a role. Two people standing side by side might see their own giants, but not each other's. Was the phenomenon therefore purely individual, like a rainbow that vanishes if you step into your friend's viewpoint? Scientists are still debating that puzzle today. The rise of aviation in the jet age gave the spectre new arenas. Commercial passengers flying above clouds often glimpsed their plane's shadow encircled by a perfect ring of light. Airlines began receiving letters from startled travelers describing mystical symbols following the aircraft. Flight attendants, no doubt suppressing a laugh, reassured them that it was just the Brocken Specter tagging along. It became something of an inside joke in the industry. Every jumbo jet had its ghost co-pilot. By the 1990s, with the explosion of mass tourism, the Harz Mountains leaned into their spectral celebrity. The Brocken, once the haunt of witches and poets, now hosted organized tours, folklore festivals, and Walpurgis Night reenactments, complete with costumes. Postcards proudly displayed drawings of towering shadow giants, and souvenir shops sold mugs printed with rainbow halos. The ghost had officially gone commercial. And yet, even with all this commercialization, the experience itself remained strangely pure. Travelers who managed to catch the spectre, still dependent on fickle weather, reported the same astonishment medieval pilgrims once felt. Technology, media, and marketing couldn't quite drain the magic. A shadow in the clouds could still stop people in their tracks, their modern skepticism dissolving in a moment of awe. As the 20th century drew to a close, the Brocken Specter stood at a curious crossroads, simultaneously explained and mysterious commodified, yet elusive embraced by scientists and spiritualists alike. It had proven itself adaptable, a phantom that could haunt textbooks, tourism posters, and paranormal conferences all at once. A ghost, with a resume really. And so, when the calendar flipped into the 21st century, the stage was set for the spectre to find new life in an even stranger realm, the internet, where shadows would go viral and giants would step from mountaintops into memes. The dawn of the 21st century gave the Brocken Specter a brand new playground, the internet. What once required foggy climbs and lucky weather could now spread instantly through photo-sharing websites, YouTube clips, and social media posts. Suddenly, this ghostly giant wasn't just a legend from the Harz Mountains, it was trending. Digital cameras, lighter and sharper than their clunky predecessors, finally captured the spectre in vivid detail. Gone were the blurry smudges of earlier decades. Now anyone could snap a crisp image of their shadow stretched across a sea of mist ringed by a rainbow halo. Hikers posted their finds online, where they racked up likes and sparked comment sections filled with everything from "Whoa, science is amazing" to "That's definitely proof of another dimension." And the memes practically wrote themselves. A popular one in the early 2010s showed a fog giant with the caption "Me arriving at Monday," like. Another declared, "When nature gives you the best profile picture." In a world obsessed with selfies, the Brocken Specter was reborn as the ultimate nature selfie, no filter needed. It turns out that a ghost made of sunlight and vapor can compete with duck face poses just fine. Travel blogs began to hype the phenomenon too. Lists of top 10 mystical travel experiences routinely included the Brocken Specter, usually with dramatic photos of hikers pointing into the fog. Tourism boards weren't about to miss the marketing opportunity. The Harz region leaned harder into its witchy branding, promising visitors a chance to meet your own ghost on the Brocken. Other mountain regions followed suit: Scotland, Japan, even Hawaii, advertising misty hikes, where you might encounter your phantom twin. Of course, science kept pace. Atmospheric physicists published accessible explainer articles online complete with animations showing how sunlight scatters and diffracts around water droplets to form glories. They noted the personal nature of the illusion. You can only ever see your own spectre, never someone else's. This little fact went viral itself, sparking philosophical threads about individuality perception and how no two people ever truly see the same rainbow. Scientists are still debating the finer points of light interference in glories, but internet users were more interested in the poetic side, so my ghost belongs only to me. One quirky tidbit from the digital age is that drone operators began reporting Brocken Specters too. As drones climbed through misty valleys, their tiny shadows were projected onto the fog below, surrounded by miniature halos. Nature, it seems, didn't care if you were a human climber or a buzzing quadcopter. You got your own ghost either way. The internet gleefully shared these drone specters, joking that even robots had spirit twins. And then came video. YouTube filled with clips of the specter slowly emerging as the sun pierced morning fog, sometimes accompanied by hikers gasping or laughing nervously. These videos gave people a taste of the ephemeral drama, the way the shadow wavered, stretched, and faded. For insomniacs scrolling at midnight, the specter became a soothing visual proof that nature could still conjure moments of quiet magic. Naturally, conspiracy forums had their say too. Some posts claimed the specter was evidence of higher beings, while others argued it revealed the aura field of the human body. A few particularly ambitious threads insisted it was a government hologram test. Scientists sighed, hikers chuckled, and the specter carried on glowing in the mist unconcerned. But perhaps the most remarkable change was how accessible the phenomenon had become. Once upon a time, you had to trek up the Brocken at dawn. Now, thanks to smartphones and cloud storage, anyone could see the specter from their couch, secondhand, or at the click of a button. Yet, just as in earlier eras, many insisted that the photos never quite matched the real thing. To feel the giant properly, you still had to stand there in the damp fog, heart thumping as your own shadow loomed impossibly large. By the 2020s, the Brocken Specter was firmly part of internet culture, equal parts science, demo, mystical meme, and travel lure. It was a rare case of an old legend thriving in the digital age, adapting seamlessly to hashtags and viral posts. The ghost had gone global, leaving the lonely mountaintop to stride across the web. And yet, for all its new fame, the Brocken Specter remained what it had always been, a fleeting illusion, born of light and mist, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. Which, if you think about it, makes it the perfect metaphor for internet trends too. War has a way of dragging even the most innocent natural wonders into its orbit, and the Brocken Specter was no exception. By the early 20th century, the Harz Mountains home to the Brocken were no longer just a tourist retreat. They became entangled in the machinery of conflict first during World War I, and then even more intensely in World War II. The Brocken's high isolated summit, often shrouded in mist, was an ideal place for observation, posts, listening stations, and military experiments. And of course, those stationed there couldn't help but notice the old phantom in the fog. Soldiers wrote of seeing the specter on lonely dawn patrols, their rifles slung across their shoulders, eyes weary from night duty. One diary from a German soldier describes looking out across a rolling sea of cloud and suddenly spotting what he swore was a towering ghostly sentinel standing guard. The figure raised its arm when he moved when he did, and though he later understood the trick, he admitted that in those long, anxious hours, it felt like an omen, perhaps a guardian, perhaps a warning. World War II brought the mountain into darker associations. The Brocken became part of the Nazi regime's network of radio and surveillance installations. The mist-cloaked peak was strategic for transmitting signals across vast distances. But imagine the eerie irony. Technicians and officers tasked with controlling the modern marvel of radio stepping outside into the fog, only to be confronted by a medieval-looking spectre of themselves. A reminder, perhaps, that no matter how advanced the machinery of war becomes, nature still plays its old tricks. There are stories, some apocryphal, some more credible, of soldiers misinterpreting the spectre as enemy scouts. In one incident, a patrol supposedly raised alarm thinking shadowy figures were approaching through the mist. Only after tense minutes of readiness did they realize they'd been staring at their own magnified outlines. One can picture the nervous laughter that followed, though it must have been tinged with embarrassment. The mountain had made fools of them yet again. During this time, a quirky tidbit circulated among the troops. Some began calling the Brocken Specter der Riese, Kamerad, the giant comrade. It was half joke, half comfort, a way of acknowledging that when loneliness bit hard, at least you could count on your spectral double to appear now and then. In a strange way, the illusion became a silent bunkmate for men stationed far from home. The Cold War added another layer of strangeness. After 1945, the Brocken found itself in East Germany, sealed off as part of the heavily fortified border zone. The mountain became a forbidden place bristling with Soviet and East German surveillance equipment. Civilians were banned, tourism halted, and the Brocken was transformed into a realm of secrecy. Yet the spectre still appeared to guards and technicians patrolling the foggy heights. Imagine being a lonely border soldier peering through binoculars for Western spies, only to find your own enormous ghost leaping out of the mist. If ghosts exist anywhere, surely it would be on a mountain divided by walls and ideology. Scientists are still debating whether those military men isolated and on edge were more prone to interpreting the spectre as something sinister. Stress and suggestion can make illusions more powerful. Perhaps that's why some accounts from this era describe not comfort, but dread, the sense of being watched by a silent shifting giant in the mist. Through both world wars and the long Cold War, the Brocken Specter threaded itself into the lives of soldiers and spies, a ghostly reminder that even amidst human conflict, the mountain held onto its old magic. The guns and radios eventually rusted away, but the spectre still lingers, waiting for the next set of eyes to stumble upon it in the fog. When the guns finally fell silent and the Cold War curtain slowly lifted, the Brocken reclaimed its older identity, not as a military outpost, but as a place of myth, tourism, and mystery. Yet by then, the Brocken Specter had already taken on a curious double life in the scientific community. For meteorologists, it was no longer just a local curiosity. It became a puzzle piece in the broader study of atmospheric optics, alongside halo sundogs and the shimmering arcs of rainbows. Scientists began analyzing the spectre with increasingly precise instruments. Cameras, prisms, and later digital sensors tried to measure the exact angles of refraction and reflection. They learned that the halo effect around the shadow, known as a glory, is caused by light waves bending around tiny water droplets in the mist scattering back toward the observer. This backward scattering or backscattering remains one of the stranger quirks of physics, Even today, the detailed mathematics of how glories form isn't fully nailed down. Scientists are still debating that microscale interaction of light and waterproof, that even in the age of satellites, the fog can keep its secrets. Of course, the explanations didn't kill the magic. In fact, they made the phenomenon even more alluring. Knowing that your shadow can appear 30 feet tall, haloed like a saint, because sunlight ricochets off billions of droplets, is oddly humbling. It's like nature giving you a temporary promotion to giant glowing deity, then gently reminding you that you're really just damp and squinting. A quirky tidbit from mid-century research: some meteorologists deliberately staged expeditions to mountaintops just to capture specters on film. One group in Switzerland in the 1950s lugged heavy photographic equipment up an Alp, hoping the weather would cooperate. They waited for hours in freezing conditions, finally got their shadow to appear, and promptly dropped a lens cap into a crevasse. The official report notes the spectre, but the margin has a scrawled complaint equipment, heavier than ghost. Meanwhile, psychologists began to take interest as well. If the spectre was just optics, why did it inspire such strong feelings, terror, awe, even reverence? Theories emerged that it acted as a mirror of the subconscious, a sudden confrontation with an exaggerated version of the self. The giant in the fog wasn't a monster, but the human ego magnified and thrown back. In an era when Freud and Jung were popular, the spectre became a convenient metaphor: meet your shadow, literally. Tourists now free to climb the Brocken again, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, found themselves walking into this blend of science and symbolism. Information plaques on the summit explained the meteorological mechanics, while souvenir shops sold postcards still showing giants looming in the mist. The spectre had officially become both a scientific phenomenon and a cultural brand. And yet, the experience on the mountain remained the same. A traveler in the 1990s described stepping onto the summit and gasping as her own rainbow-crowned shadow floated across the fog. I knew exactly what it was, she wrote, and yet I still cried. It was like shaking hands with my own ghost. The Brocken Specter, once feared as a devil's trick, had survived centuries of interpretation. Science might map the light paths, but the heart still felt the mystery. And that balance, the known and the unknowable, kept people climbing cameras in hand, hearts pounding, as they waited for the mist to work its timeless magic. As the 21st century arrived, the Brocken Specter found itself not only on mountaintops, but also on the internet. Travelers snapped photos and uploaded them, eager to prove they had encountered the ghost in the mist. Social media turned the once rare sighting into a kind of viral badge of honor. On Instagram and travel blogs, glowing rainbow halos framed hikers' heads, their shadows stretching like giants across seas of fog. Hashtags like @Juglaat Brocken Specter and Ikaar Glory Circle began to collect thousands of entries. But the digital age didn't strip the mystery, it amplified it. People who might never climb a German mountain suddenly stumbled across videos of the phenomenon online and gasped, as if seeing magic for the first time. Comments often read the same: "This looks fake," or "Is this Photoshop?" The irony is delightful. The spectre, once used as proof of witches, was now accused of being digital trickery. Either way, people refused to believe their eyes. Meanwhile, scientists and photographers armed with drones began chasing specters deliberately. Drones allowed new angles, capturing the rainbow glory around shadows suspended in the mist from above. Some of these images looked so otherworldly that they were compared to UFO sightings. One fringe enthusiast even claimed specters were portals appearing in the atmosphere. Scientists patiently explained the optics, but as always, mystery has a way of sneaking back in. Scientists are still debating that fine line where natural wonder ends and human imagination begins. Tourism, too, adapted. the Brocken once again became a popular hiking destination, now free from Cold War restrictions. Guided tours advertised your chance to meet your ghostly twin. Some even joked in brochures, guaranteed selfie with your shadow or your money back. Fog not included. Visitors brought smartphones, tripods, and portable coffee flasks, treating the summit like a theatre where the show might or might not begin. One quirky detail, a cafe at the base of the Brocken, began serving a cocktail called the Specter, a glowing, layered drink of clear schnapps and misty tonic water. Tourists sipped it before trekking up, raising glasses to their soon-to-be giant selves. The only ghost we'll meet is hangover, one reviewer quipped. Yet even in this era of memes and hashtags, the old awe remained. Hikers described standing quietly as the fog shifted and their enormous double flickered into view. The glowing halo still felt sacred even if the moment was later posted with a cheeky caption. Some compared it to a reminder of perspective, that we're all just tiny humans, whose shadows sometimes appear larger than life. In a world filled with screens, the Brocken Specter offers something rare, a moment that can't be guaranteed bought or streamed. You have to be there in the cold air, waiting with patience as nature decides whether to unveil the phantom. And when it does, no filter can fully capture it. So even in the 21st century, the Brocken Specter continues to straddle two worlds, ancient and modern, mythic and scientific, physical and digital. It is both a trending hashtag and a timeless ghost. And every time the fog rolls in on a sunny morning, it quietly reminds humanity that the most astonishing illusions are the ones nature performs for free. But the Brocken Specter is not confined to mountaintops alone. Over the years, people have reported seeing similar apparitions in other landscapes wherever mist, sunlight, and perspective align. Airplane passengers, for instance, often spot glories and spectre-like shadows cast on cloud banks below the wings. Imagine peering out of a tiny oval window and seeing your plane transformed into a colossal phantom haloed in rainbow rings. It feels as if the sky itself is bowing to your flight, though the pilot will calmly explain it's just light, scattering off droplets. Sailors too have claimed to see ghostly shadows walking across sea fog, though these are rarer. One quirky maritime tale from the 19th century tells of a ship's lookout convinced a giant figure was pacing the waves beside them. The captain, amused later, explained it was their own mast's shadow stretching across fog. The poor lookout never lived it down, earning the nickname Ghost Walker for the rest of the voyage. On the ground, hikers in the Scottish Highlands and the Alps report encounters with their spectral twins. The Highlanders, already steeped in lore of spirits and fairies, sometimes describe the illusion as an omen. Whether of fortune or doom depended on who you asked. Alpine shepherds called it simply the phantom shepherd, as if the mountain itself was joining their flock. Modern scientists have collected these reports to show how widespread the phenomenon truly is. It's a natural trick that doesn't belong to one culture, though each region drapes it in local stories. Scientists are still debating that cultural lens, whether our interpretation of the spectre tells us more about atmospheric physics or about the human need to explain mysteries with myth. And the funny thing, even when the science is plain as day, people continue to treat the spectre like a personal message. One traveler in Patagonia wrote, "When I saw my giant shadow on the fog, I felt as if the mountain was telling me, you matter even out here. The physics may be global, but the experience is deeply personal." Photography and video now make it easier to prove these encounters, but they rarely match the intensity of seeing it live. The moving fog, the shifting light, the giant mimicking every tilt of your arm, it feels alive in a way no still image can replicate. like watching a movie trailer versus standing in the middle of the film itself. The Brocken Specter, then, is less a single place-bound marvel and more a universal whisper from nature. Whether on a mountain from an airplane or across the sea, it reminds humanity that the world is full of strange mirrors, giants waiting to emerge from light and mist, ready to reflect us back to ourselves. But if the Brocken Specter has its roots in mist and light, then its wings are surely in legend. Few atmospheric illusions have inspired so much folklore poetry and superstition. In the Harz Mountains, locals once believed that the giant figures on the mist were witches gathering for the fabled Walpurgis night. According to Germanic tradition, every spring witches would ride their broomsticks to Brocken's Peak, where they danced with spirits and played tricks upon unsuspecting travelers. The ghostly shadows then were not seen as personal reflections at all, but as witches themselves, giants moving through a veil between worlds. Romantic poets of the 18th and 19th centuries adored this imagery. Writers like Goethe and Heinrich Heine used the Brocken as a symbol of the mysterious, the uncanny, and the sublime. Goethe even set a famous scene of his play Faust on the Brocken during Walpurgis night, where witches cavort in the mist. Readers knew of the spectre and linked it instantly to the atmosphere of his story. To them, the mountain was not just geography. It was an altar of mystery cloaked in fog and haunted by phantoms. Meanwhile, in Victorian England, travellers who visited the Harz returned with tales of their own encounters. Newspapers and travel journals carried descriptions of giant men of fog, and readers back home were enchanted. Some saw it as proof of supernatural forces, others as nature's way of humbling man with his own image. The Victorians, ever fond of spiritualism and seances, could not resist the thought that perhaps the spectre was a door to another world. In other cultures, the legend took on different flavors. Tibetan travelers crossing high passes told of the walking gods of the mist, their shadows haloed in rainbow rings. In Japan, Shinto traditions sometimes linked the phenomenon to mountain kami divine presences guarding sacred peaks. Wherever the spectre appeared, it easily fit into existing belief systems, becoming another face of the divine, ghostly, or magical. Even today, tourists who climb Brocken are often primed by stories of witches and spirits. Local guides lean into the myth, sometimes dressing in cloaks on Walpurgis night, to entertain visitors. The line between folklore and science blurs, and perhaps that is the true legacy of the spectre. It doesn't matter whether you call it optics or magic. To stand before your towering shadow crowned in rainbow fire is to feel as though the mountain itself has acknowledged your presence. The legend survives because the experience defies the ordinary. It is not enough to know the formula of reflection and refraction. Human beings crave story, and the Brocken Specter has always provided one half science, half myth, entirely unforgettable. In time, the Brocken Specter ceased to be only the realm of fear or legend. It became a pilgrimage of curiosity, a spectacle people longed to see. As travel grew easier in the 19th and 20th centuries, tourists streamed into the Harz Mountains with hopes of catching the ghostly phenomenon. Hotels sprang up near the trails, guides advertised excursions, and postcards of the Brocken featured misty silhouettes standing above the clouds. What once terrified lonely wanderers now lured thousands with promise of awe. The trick, however, was patience. The spectre required just the right conditions, fog or cloud beneath the sun, with the viewer's shadow projected forward. Travellers would sometimes wait for hours on the mountaintop, shivering in cold, damp air, only to descend disappointed. Others luckier would gasp as the veil of mist lifted just enough to reveal the towering double of themselves ringed in spectral halos. For many, the wait was worth it. The fleeting vision left a lifelong impression. Festivals and events began to embrace the mystery. Walpurgis Night, once whispered as a witch's Sabbath, was reimagined as a lively cultural celebration. Costumes, fires, music, and dances filled the town surrounding Brocken, attracting visitors from across Europe. Tourists mingled with locals drawn by both the folklore and the chance, however slim, to see the ghostly giant. By the 20th century, the phenomenon had crossed oceans with magazines and travel books in America and Britain, urging readers to seek out the phantom of Brocken. Photographs of the spectre began circulating, lending credibility to those who had long claimed to see it. Even so, the images never quite captured the grandeur of the experience. A flat print could not replicate the shiver of recognition, the sense of standing before a living myth. In modern times, with hiking more popular than ever, the Brocken remains a magnet for seekers of wonder. Families, students, and adventurers trek up its slopes, scanning the horizon for the perfect blend of mist and light. Local businesses offer guided tours promising history legend, and if fortune smiles the chance to meet one's own towering twin. The mountain, once cloaked in dread, is now an icon of wonder. Its ghostly giant no longer drives men to their knees in fear, but lifts their hearts in astonishment. The Brocken Specter has become a symbol of tourism's strange alchemy, turning haunting into heritage terror, into treasure, myth into memory. As cameras became smaller and more powerful, the Brocken Specter moved from whispered tale to captured image. Early hikers tried to sketch the phenomenon, but drawings could not convey its shimmering halos or the vast, shifting scale of the shadow. When photography arrived in the late 19th century, the challenge was even greater. Mist is fickle and exposure times were long. Many photographs ended up with nothing but blank whiteness, while the fleeting giant dissolved back into fog. By the mid-20th century, however, as portable cameras improved, more travelers succeeded in snapping the elusive spectre. Grainy black and white shots appeared in travel journals and scientific papers, often annotated with careful notes about the sun's position and the angle of the slope. Some viewers were disappointed without the movement of the mist, the halo of light, or the eerie silence of the mountaintop. The photos seemed oddly flat, yet for others, each captured image was proof the giant was real, not just a rumor. Modern technology transformed the experience once more. High-resolution cameras, drones, and even smartphones now catch the phenomenon in startling detail. Videos circulate online of hikers gasping as their colossal doubles appear framed in rainbow rings, swaying gently in the drifting fog. Social media has carried the Brocken Specter far beyond the heart, making it a global curiosity. Travelers around the world now seek it, not only in Germany, but on mountains from Scotland to Japan, often guided by tutorials that explain when and where to look. And yet, despite all these pictures, the mystery has not faded. A photo may show the shape and color, but it cannot convey the emotion the way a person's breath catches, as they realize the giant is themselves magnified by nature. The camera records light, but it cannot record awe. This paradox keeps the Brocken Specter alive in both science and story. Each photograph is proof of the illusion, yet each also serves as an invitation whispering, "Come see for yourself." And so people still climb into the mist, not content with an image on a screen, but longing for that strange and personal meeting with a giant of their own shadow. In the last few decades, the Brocken Specter has escaped its mountaintop origins and slipped into the digital realm. What once required a perilous climb through the heart is now reimagined on glowing screens in games and in films, where ghostly giants stride across clouds. Directors love the effect. It's dramatic, uncanny, and needs almost no special effects because nature already did the hard work. In a few popular movies, you'll see a lone traveler stand on a ridge, the mist curling around them, only for their shadow to expand into a godlike form, haloed in spectral light. Audiences who never heard of the Brocken nod along, thinking it's clever cinematography, not realizing they're watching a real mountain phenomenon. Video games have taken it further. Some titles use the effect as a hidden Easter egg climb high stand in the right light, and your character sprouts a Brocken double across the valley wall. Players debate in forums whether the developers intentionally recreated the specter or stumbled onto it by accident while coding fog physics. Scientists are still debating that, or at least players are, which sometimes feels just as heated. And then there's virtual reality. A headset can place someone on a simulated mountaintop with programmed mist and an artificial sun. Yet even there, something feels different. A generated specter lacks the bite of cold air, the crunch of gravel under boots, the heart thump of standing at an actual cliff edge. The virtual giant may look perfect, but without the body senses, it feels hollow. It's the same puzzle we noted with photography. Technology can reproduce the light, but not the awe. Still, this digital migration has kept the legend alive, maybe even more alive than before. People who never heard of the Harz Mountains now type Brocken Specter into search bars after spotting it in a show or game. They tumble down the rabbit hole of history, weather science, and ghost stories, and some even book flights to Germany eager to meet their mist giant in person. The shadow has gone global, proving that even in the age of algorithms, a natural illusion can still capture imagination across centuries. The Brocken Specter, for all its scientific explanation, still clings to the edges of mystery. Hikers today know the conditions required low sun-drifting mist a high vantage point. They know the physics of light scattering and the geometry of shadows. Yet when the moment comes when their silhouette swells into a towering phantom, haloed by spectral rings, the intellectual knowledge fades. What remains is that quickening pulse, that instinctive shiver. It's the same chill that medieval travelers felt, the same awe that Goethe wrote into his verses. Science may explain the how, but it cannot soften the feeling. Debates continue in journals and conferences. Some scholars argue that folklore around the spectre shaped early mountain tourism. Others claim it influenced European art far more than recorded. Psychologists wonder why the phenomenon strikes so deeply, why people report not just surprise, but a strange blend of fear and intimacy. After all, the giant is nothing more than oneself stretched across vapor. Is it unnerving to see one's body made strange, or comforting to glimpse a version of the self that is bigger, brighter, ringed with rainbow light? Scientists are still debating that, and perhaps always will. Meanwhile, the legend persists. On Walpurgis night, revelers still climb the Brocken, imagining witches and giants swirling in the fog. Tour guides still whisper of ghostly doubles that stalk the slopes. And solitary wanderers still pause at dawn or dusk, staring across the mist, hoping their shadow might bloom into something greater. The mountain does not promise, it only offers a chance, a flicker, a trick of light and imagination that lingers far longer than the mist itself. So the Brocken Specter remains what it has always been, a boundary phenomenon, between science and superstition, between self and other, between what is seen and what is felt. And that thin shifting border is perhaps what makes it endure. In a world of satellites and simulations, the mountain still holds a secret that is both perfectly understood and endlessly mysterious. And now, as we leave the Brocken and its wandering shadows behind, It's time to let the story soften and fade like mist, dissolving in the morning sun. The giants shrink back into ordinary outlines, the halos slip away, and the mountain grows quiet again. You've walked through centuries of fear, fascination, and wonder. And yet, in the end, the spectre was nothing more than light and air. Simple, but beautiful. Take a slow breath in and let it out even slower. Notice how the edges of the day's worries blur like fog drifting off a ridge. Whatever thoughts you carried into this story, the errands undone the concerns of tomorrow. They can grow faint now, as though swallowed by the mountain mist. You don't need them here, not tonight. Imagine standing on a high slope at twilight. The air is cool, the ground solid beneath your feet. A faint mist curls around soft and harmless, carrying with it the last glow of sunset. You stretch and your shadow lengthens across the fog. It grows taller and taller until it becomes something vast and gentle, haloed in quiet light. And you realize that this giant, this ghostly guardian, is simply you. A larger, softer version of yourself, patient and calm, watching over you as you drift towards sleep. The mountain air is still. The light grows dimmer. You take one more breath and another, each one deeper, each one slower. The giant fades, the mist thins, and the night wraps around you like a blanket. There is nothing left to do, nowhere left to climb. Just rest safe and easy, while dreams rise like clouds to carry you away. So let your shoulders sink, let your body loosen, and allow your mind to wander into the soft places where sleep waits. The Brocken is behind you now, but its quiet magic lingers. You are calm, you are safe, and the night is yours.